Hello, hello, hello. Let's get started. Chapter 2 Through the Chute. Outside, the great pyramidal compass tower glittered in the sunlight. It was taller by half than any other structure in the city, and stood as a familiar landmark. Below it, the skyline was a varied line of spires, domes, cubes, and towers. Derek and Catherine rode the slidewalk in silence. He had an idea of where to find Chemo, since the ongoing shape-changing of the city had been discontinued, although the robots still renovated and built constantly. One of the many benefits of ending the shape-changing was that the robots had been building a coherent system of slidewalks for pedestrian traffic. Still, finding one's way around Robot City remained a challenge. His anger was cooling quickly. In the distance ahead he could see a large dome on the horizon, a brilliant, shining bronze color. It was near the site of Chemo's operation, and Derek guessed it was the Key Center itself. "I noticed a similar dome here once," she said, also gazing at it. "Any idea what it is?" "Not exactly, no." "What does that mean?" He glanced at her warily, thinking he had detected an edge in her voice, but she was still looking up at the building. He raised his gaze again, still walking. "Well, actually, what I mean is, sometimes the robots have to house a certain class of facilities that can't be fit into normal industrial bays or doors. I haven't looked closely at any of these domes, but I think they're used for stuff like that. I don't see any doors now that you mention it. I suppose they're on the other side. The key is small enough to carry, though. I don't see why they would need a gigantic dome for it." "Maybe that's not the place," Derek shrugged. "Maybe the Key Center is in a mud hut next door." "Very funny. If that particular dome is new, I'm betting it was set up for the key." "I'm not arguing. But we have to get off the slidewalk. It's being fixed up or something just ahead. There isn't a functioning one to take us from there to here to there." "I hope you don't expect me to walk that far." She stepped off the slidewalk with him. A small function robot, the class without the positronic brains, skittered out of her way. It was a small scrap collector, gathering debris as it moved on a cushion of short, nimble legs around the construction site. It was headed for a sewer chute in which it deposits its load. A human robot, of the foreman class in the city, approached them. The sunlight shone on the distinctive, helmeted head and blue skin. "Identify yourself," Catherine ordered. "I am Construction Foreman 391." The robot's eyes, deep in the darkness of its horizontal eye slit, focused on her. "What is the most convenient way for us to reach—" "Derek, tell it where." He noted that she had spoken to him in the same impervious tone she used of the robots. "We're going to that dome or somewhere close to it. It's about 6.4 kilometers." "Frost!" She turned on him. Weren't going to walk that far, were you?" "Of course not." "Perhaps the vacuum chute would be safe for humans," said Foreman 391. "You must ask a chute foreman. May the maintenance robot resume its duties?" Of course." Catherine glanced down at the scrap collector, which she had inadvertently trapped against the sewer chute. It whirled patiently at her feet until she moved out of the way. Then it headed back into the construction site. "A vacuum chute?" Derek asked. "I don't remember anything about a vacuum chute before. That's pretty archaic technology, too." "Yes, it is being used because a new facility in Robot City is producing a strong partial vacuum as a side effect. Utilizing this side effect constitutes an efficient use of energy." "Say, you're rather proud of that, aren't you?" Derek grinned with amusement. "You must have worked on the vacuum chutes, huh?" "This is not pride. It is recognition that certain principles of efficiency have been successfully executed. Yes, all the construction foremen at my level had to be consulted when the chute system was routed through the city." "Forget the frosted chutes," Catherine said irritably. "What about that big bronze dome?" "What about it? Aren't you a construction foreman? You must know what it's for." "Yes." "Would you tell us, please?" Derek hid a smile at her frustration. At times she had handled robots very well, but today did not seem to be her day. In fact, both of them occasionally reached to the point where they were infuriated by the literal interpretations that the robots made of human speech. "These designs are used to house extremely large or oddly shaped facilities of all kinds. The—" "Excuse me," said Derek, But would an extremely important facility, one that had special priority, be in one of those domes also? I have no role in decision-making of that kind. But from your experience in Robot City, do you think it might be likely? The materials used in the construction of the dome do not offer any special advantage based on the premise you have given. Derek sighed. Okay. What is this stuff anyhow? Are you referring to the construction material? Yes. Derek gritted his teeth and caught Catherine suppressing a smile this time. The external shell is the only significant distinction of material these domes possess. It is comprised of a material called dianite. Dianite is a specialized form of the modular material from which all of Robot City is constructed. This substance has a number of unusual qualities. In its solid form it is extremely hard, yet very light in weight and with high tensile strength. However, its most unusual property is that— Okay, thank you. Is there a method of normal transportation that will take us there, from here? Normally the slidewalk would take you there, but as under modification no normal transportation is available that will do this. What about those chutes? Catherine asked. Allow me to consult the central computer. Yes, one of them is on a direct line from here to a stop near your destination. You understand that a chute foreman must be consulted for matters of safety? Right, said Derek. Where do we find one? The nearest chute stop is 2 blocks forward and 1 block left. I must resume my duties. Come on! Catherine took off at a run. They ran along the motionless slidewalk as long as they could, then jumped off and ran along its shoulder. Here and there they had to skip around functioning robots going about their business and passed a couple of foremen as well. In moments they had turned left at the corner and come skidding up to a small loading dock. A foreman robot was standing on the dock, watching a small function robot use an arm-like crane to lift a container. The function robot was hoisting molded containers from a long, transparent tube that lay horizontally along the dock. We need that, Catherine said brusquely. How does it work? It is pulled through the chute by a powerful vacuum, said the foreman. What is your need for it? Identify yourself. I am chute foreman 3-4. The robot looked back and forth between them. I've never had direct contact with humans before. Catherine threw her arms up in a gesture of impatience that Derek knew all too well. He was glad not to be the cause of it this time. Yes, we're humans. Congratulations, genius. Now. Derek rushed to get in front of her, surprised at her sudden aggressiveness. We're going to that dome. A construction foreman suggested we inquire as to whether a vacuum chute would be safe for us to travel in. Chute foreman 3-4 glanced down at the tube. From here, Derek could see that it was resting in a siding away from the chute vacuum itself. Yes, this tube is safe for cargo more fragile than humans. It has ventilation and padding. However, it may not be comfortable. How Derek started. Frost that, we'll take it. Catherine pushed Derek aside and climbed down into the open tube. Derek followed her and found that, while the slick cushion was padded well enough, they had to recline along the length of the transparent tube for the door to slide shut. He found himself lying against her and moved over self-consciously. I will send you to the stop nearest the dome, said the robot, just before it secured the door. I hope it has more experience with these chutes than it has with humans, said Catherine. Derek wiggled a little to get more comfortable, his gaze aimed upward at the sky. He began to speak, but the jolting start of the tube interrupted the effort. With a great rushing of air, it accelerated quickly and shot into a black chute. Air was swirling from the tube. Apparently the ventilation consisted of carefully shaped openings in the back of the tube, which pulled some air into the tube as it was drawn along. He was trying to figure out how that could work when suddenly the chute curved upward. All at once he felt himself sliding head first and on his back toward the rear of the tube. Laughing, he and Catherine clenched at each other and tried vainly to brace themselves against the smooth sides of the tube. Light flooded the tube, nearly blinding Derek. When he could focus his eyes, he and Catherine both shouted and grabbed at each other again. The chute was now as transparent as the tube, and they were shooting along high above the ground. Just ahead, the chute wound between 2 large buildings. Though Derek knew better, he felt his whole body tighten reflexively with the fear that they were about to smash into one of the walls. Catherine apparently felt the same, inhaling sharply just as they plunged into the gap between the buildings. The sides of the buildings were a blur all around them. The chute then swerved upward again, keeping them both pinned against the rear of the tube, braced with their arms held above their heads. The building first fell away on her side, then on his. He felt his stomach seem to drop as he watched the roof tops recede below him. Traveling in an enclosed spacecraft was one thing, but actually watching the ground fall from him triggered all the instinctive fears of heights that his ancient ancestors had acquired by falling out of trees. Beside him, Catherine was giggling nervously. The chute leveled off and Derek let out a cautious breath. She turned to face him, just inches away. "Pretty wild, huh?" He grinned, but didn't trust himself to speak. Now that they were speeding along a level section of the chute, he was able to relax a little. When he took a tentative look off to the side, he found that most of the city was now below them, but a few of the tallest towers and obelisks could still throw a shadow over the chute at the right hour. He guessed that the erratic route of the chute was due to the recent discontinuation of the automatic shape-changing in the city. New developments were more likely to be built around existing structures now. The city was strikingly pretty from this height, and it stretched as far as he could see from his cramped position. Suddenly the tube plunged steeply downward, and Derek gasped as he found himself staring almost straight down at a drop of several hundred meters. He felt himself sliding toward the front of the tube and clawed futilely for a handhold. Catherine was also flailing about, and they wound up throwing their arms around each other. The speed of the tube was such, however, that they did not actually fall to the front of the tube. It was accelerating, and Derek felt his ears pop from the sudden change in altitude. He hadn't even noticed the pressure change on their startling ascent. Finally the tube leveled off again, and smoothly, and then gently rose again just enough to decelerate and come to an easy stop. Derek lay where he was for a moment, looking at Catherine. She smiled and looked away as they entangled themselves. The tube door opened and another foreman looked down at them. "Unusual cargo," the robot said. "You are unharmed?" Derek and Catherine laughed as they climbed out, nodding in reassurance. He noticed that she had lost her hard edge somewhere on the breathtaking ride. "There it is," said Catherine. The dome rose right in front of them, the great bronze surface nearly blinding them in the bright sunlight. The dianite had a fine, pebbly texture, which saved them from an even worse glare. High above them, the curve of the dome carried the top out of sight. "I don't see a door anywhere," said Derek. They started walking around the base of the dome, looking all over its nearly smooth, unbroken surface. It was even higher than Derek had guessed from a distance. It had no visible seams or openings of any kind. When the tunnel's top came into view again, they knew they had walked all the way around the base of the dome. Derek stopped, still looking for any hint of how to enter. He supposed an opening was possible at the top, but placing it there seemed out of character for Robot City. Catherine brushed her fingertips along the dianite. "It's pretty." "Yeah," Derek rapped on the hard surface experimentally. "I suppose we could stand out here and shout, but I doubt anyone inside would hear us." Catherine faced the dome and backed away, searching the even curve again. He had taken just a few steps to follow her when he heard a muted ripping sound behind him. When he looked back, he saw the dianite opening in a jagged line where they had been standing, as though invisible hands were tearing it. As they watched, the blue-skinned form of a humanoid robot stepped out. Catherine drew herself up. "Take us to Chemo," she ordered firmly. "This is a security area. What is your business with Chemo?" the robot asked. "Identify yourself," she demanded. "I am Security 1K. What is your business with Chemo?" "You must give us the key to Prairie Hellion." Derek stepped beside her, afraid that her direct, rather arrogant approach was going to backfire if they didn't offer some kind of explanation. "According to the second law you must obey our orders. After you take us to Chemo we will instruct him to hand over the key. Let's go." He started forward confidently, though it was only a bluff. Security 1K did not take the bluff. It did not move aside at all. "No." Derek stepped back, not wanting to challenge the robot's physical prowess. He knew that the posteronic brains in the robots were reliable, so his earlier assumptions seemed to be true. The robots were operating under second-law instructions, certainly from the mysterious holder of the office in the compass tower. That suggested a new argument to him. "Hold it," said Derek. "Look, apparently you have a very strong second-law imperative that you're operating on, established previously. Okay? But that was a general instruction, I'll bet. Right?" "That is right. The need for security in this matter is a part of the entire project of this facility. But I'm giving you a specific important order right now I believe that should override a general instruction relying on broadly based programming." Actually, he wasn't sure if he believed that at all, but it was worth a try. Security 1K hesitated. When the post-traumatic brain of a robot paused long enough for a human to notice, the argument had at least been considered worth an internal debate. "No," the robot said, after what was, for it, a considerable length of time. "The earlier imperative stands." Derek sighed, but he wasn't surprised. "Our well-being is at stake," Catherine declared. "We must consult with Chemo. Your prevention of this violates the first law." "How?" Security 1K asked. "We can't thrive in a city full of robots. We need other people around us." As the robot continued to debate with Catherine, Derek looked at the open edge of the Dionite. It seemed oddly familiar, especially in its texture, but he couldn't figure out why. The substance offered no sign of any frame. It looked quite thin and seemed to constitute the entire wall. "You are in no danger," Security 1K was saying. "This is not a first-law problem." She glanced at Derek, who shrugged. The robot was backing into the dome again. A moment later, the two sides of the Dionite seemed to straighten and grow together. Carefully, Derek tapped the former opening, afraid it might be hot. It was not, so he ran his hand over the wall in that area. The surface seemed fully integrated with the rest of the wall. He looked at Catherine and raised his eyebrows. "Catherine, whoever's behind the creation of this city is some kind of genius. Maybe the robots invented this dynamite and maybe they didn't, but somebody created them. This stuff would be worth a fortune off this planet, just like so many other things here." She spun away and started walking quickly along the base of the dome. Astonished, he watched her for a moment, then went into sputtering rage. "What is wrong with you? You've been acting crazy all day. Come back here!" He ran after her. Catherine had stiffened at his shouts and had then begun walking faster. At the sound of his running footsteps she broke into a run also. He slowed to a walk, realizing that she was truly determined not to talk. Catching her wouldn't help any. Then he whirled angrily and slammed his fist against the wall. "Hey! Open up in there!" He pounded on the Dionite a few more times. Then he stepped back, breathing hard. A new hole torn open in the wall and Security 1K appeared in the opening. It did not step out this time. "Do you have further business here?" "Yes! Bring Chemo out here!" It felt good to yell at somebody and the robot couldn't just walk away. "If you do not have new reasons to see him, I request you stop instructing me to listen to you. Do you have new reasons?" Derek glanced down the way for Catherine, who had stopped to watch. "Well, please avoid unnecessary contact with this facility," said Security 1K. It backed away from the opening, which began to heal again. Derek watched in frustration as the substance quickly closed. On an instant's impulse he leaned against the solid portion of the wall and pulled off one of his boots. He stuck it into the small portion of the wall that still remained, and kept a careful eye on the Dionite as it grew together. Now he remembered why it was familiar. The substance was similar to the material out of which these robots were made, possibly even a cellular material. He had had experience with these robot parts when he had created the robot Alpha. That had occurred long before he had reached Robot City, but after his amnesia had come on him. This Dionite did not seem to be alive exactly, but it certainly had some startling properties. The Dionite grew around the boot, and stopped, much to his relief. He had been afraid it would simply keep growing together even if he had to cut right through the boot. Instead, his boot had been incorporated into the wall as part of it. He leaned down close and prodded the dynamite around his boot with his finger. He was right. The tearing sound had given away the secret. This stuff was very hard as an integral unit, but once the tear was started it was quite fragile, and even grew limp within a short radius of the tear. He was able to pull a few of the molecules apart of his finger now. The tear could be opened again. He just hoped no one on the other side was in a position to see him. "Catherine, come on!" He gently began tearing the wall upward like fabric. It was tough, but it gave. When he looked up she hadn't moved. "Come on!" He lowered his voice, suddenly aware that he had a sizable opening in the wall, nearly enough to crawl through, or be heard through. Catherine turned and started walking away. Derek wanted to shout, but didn't dare. Then, clenching his jaw, he crawled into the opening, leaving his boot behind to hold the breach as the wall grew together again behind him. He would have a talk with her later. He found himself on the floor behind a large, bulky piece of machinery. The sounds of robots moving about had reached him, but most would be function robots. He did not hear any voices. Of course, the foremen had their comlinks for communicating with each other. He spotted Security 1K sitting high on a stool at the far side of the dome, monitoring a console that probably reported a number of effects that would include the vibrations in the wall that Derek and Catherine had caused by touching and punching it. Since 1K was still at the console, Derek judged that the monitor had accepted the boot as part of the wall. Certainly the wall had grown in solidly around it. The ceiling was just over the security console, signifying at least one upper floor, if not more. The interior curve of the dome was out of sight above it. On the floor, the entire crew of robots assigned to Chemo seemed to be working on different pieces of equipment that varied greatly in size. One foreman was seated at a computer console on the floor beneath the raised seat of Security 1K. Derek guessed that this was Chemo and started working his way through the machines to reach the robot without being noticed. Thank you, as always, for listening. I'll have the next part uploaded next week. I'm going to start putting in links to find the books on Amazon, because I realize that's probably a good idea. But yeah, have a good day.